Forum 2100. This is David Gauci, and Dave Nagel and I are pleased to have you join us for the 10th talk in our series on business and energy. Today, we are delighted to have as our guest Dr. Quinta Nwanosike-Warren, a chemical engineer and an energy professional. Dr. Nwanosike-Warren has experience in oil and gas, electricity generation and transmission, energy policy reform, and international development. Dr. Warren's presentation will focus on the role that energy can play in sustainable development, with a special perspective on Africa. Quickly, before we begin, some simple rules of the road. We'll have a presentation of 18 minutes duration that'll be followed immediately by 10 minutes of questions and answers. You are encouraged to submit questions at any point. Please use the chat function in Zoom to do so. I shall do my best to compile the questions and then present them to Dr. Nwanosike-Warren during the Q&A. Quinta, welcome to Forum 2100. The floor is now yours for 18 minutes.
All right, thank you so much. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Today, I'll be talking about the role of energy in sustainable development. As you heard, my name is Dr. Quinta Nwanosike-Warren, and I am the CEO of Energy Research Consulting. So let's begin with a brief agenda. I'll tell you about myself, then I'll tell you about Africa. I'll tell you about my company, Energy Research Consulting. Then we'll talk about sustainable development. And then finally, I'll give you examples of projects that are both sustainable and unsustainable. So about me, I am Pan-African. I am Nigerian, born to Nigerian parents, but was born in Cameroon. So I grew up there, but I also grew up in Zambia. And I've been to about 15 different countries in Africa. So Africa is really dear to my heart. I'm also a world traveler. I've been to every single continent, including Antarctica. And I've been to more than 53 countries all over the world. I also think of myself as an adventurous. I'll try almost anything. I'll try almost anything once. I'll go almost anywhere. And this adventurous spirit also spills over into my professional life. So on a professional level, I am a chemical engineer and I am an energy professional. I got my bachelor's from Penn State and my PhD from Georgia Tech. I'm a registered professional engineer in the state of Texas, and I'm a project management professional. Career-wise, I began my career at ConocoPhillips, which is an oil and gas company. And my first job there was research on CO2 capture. Then I moved into research on extraction of heavy oil from our oil sands fields in Canada. And then because I'd only worked in research, I got really curious about operations, and I got myself into operations, and I became a reservoir engineer taking care of a gas field in South Texas. Around this time, oil and gas prices fell, or oil prices fell, and the company started selling assets to try to get cash. And so I led the team of reservoir engineers that actually sold my asset. So it was a successful divestiture, and I'm pretty proud of being involved in that. But that meant my job went away, and the company was also laying people off in an effort to save money. My management gave me the option to move to Alaska, but I turned that down because for me, that wasn't the right move at the time. So I took the layoff money and I traveled all over the world. I had a great time, great adventures. And then when I came back, I started my adventure in the professional world. So I formed my own company, Energy Research Consulting, and we work on providing sustainable energy and water solutions for small and medium-sized businesses, primarily in Africa. In doing this work, I became interested in how we could get government engaged in our projects. And so I saw the opportunity to do the AAAS Fellowship. AAAS is the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And they place scientists and engineers with advanced degrees in government in order to teach the scientists about government, but also so that they can contribute their knowledge of science to policymaking and policy implementation. So I worked with the Department of Energy first, and I learned a lot about power generation and power transmission, and also international diplomacy. So essentially using energy technology as a diplomacy tool. And then I wanted to focus more on international development. So for the second year of my fellowship, I moved to a different agency called the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which does nothing but international development. And I worked on energy policy, but also learned a lot more about power generation, transmission, and distribution. And oh, by the way, around the time that I started my company, I published a textbook called A Practical Guide to Oil and Gas Resource Characterization for Geologists and Reservoir Engineers. So my career has taken me from academia to industry to entrepreneurship and government. I don't know what's left, but when I find it, I hope to work in it. So let's begin with a background on Africa. Africa is truly misunderstood. Not enough information is known about it, but hopefully today you guys get some more information that you can go and share with everyone else. So let's begin with looking at the true size of Africa. Africa is obviously bigger than the US. You can see that, you know, Africa is a continent, not a country. It has 54 different countries, about 1.2 billion people. And actually many countries in Africa have a high female representation in parliament. Rwanda is particularly notable because it has about 64% female representation. About 22% of working age people in Africa are entrepreneurs. In my opinion, that's low, but because I meet a lot of entrepreneurs when I travel back home. But I think that probably a lot of entrepreneurship is informal, so is not officially recognized. In any case, 65% of people in Africa have access to electricity, and about 63% of people in Africa have access to piped water. Let's talk about small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs. SMEs are important for the economy of African countries. Actually, they're important for the economy of any country. But since we're focusing on Africa, let's look at that context. They're important because they provide employment opportunities, because they fill unmet needs. And generally an entrepreneur will have a need and they'll figure out how to meet that need. And then they'll recognize that other people in the community have that same need and they'll start to supply that service or that product. SMEs generate tax revenue because then they pay taxes and then government gets extra income that they can use for development projects. SMEs also create wealth, certainly for the business owner if the business is successful, but also in paying people, they pay people a living wage and people have disposable income, then people can spend money and that makes the economy better. So what are the operating constraints for firms in Africa? According to the Brookings Institute, there are several, but number 2 is electricity. Electricity constraints fall primarily into 3 categories. Number 1 is availability. So is electricity available at all? Number 2 is quality. When electricity is available, do you have a supply that's not interrupted? Or are you liable to deal with unexpected outages? And then finally, if it's available, is it reasonably priced? Can people afford it? Or is it so expensive that it eats into the company's profit margins? Let's look at electrification rates in Africa. Understand that there's a difference between rural rates and urban rates. So if we look at the first panel, blue means low, so that's 0% electrification rate, and yellow is 100%, and in the middle, you have purple. So if we look at the first panel, we're looking at rural electrification rates in the year 2016. And you can see that in the middle part of West Africa, and the middle part of Central and Southern Africa, there are a lot of blues. So that means in the rural areas, we actually have very low electrification rates, almost 0 in a lot of cases. In the second panel, we're looking at urban electrification rates in the same year, 2016. And you can see that the rates are so much better. So actually in a lot of countries in Africa, in the urban areas, we're looking at, well, pretty much a number that I quoted, about 65% electrification rate. However, to get an overall national electrification rate, we combine rural and urban rates, and that gives us the panel, our last panel, the third one. And so you can see that the rural rates really depress the overall electrification rates. So next time someone quotes an electrification rate to you, ask them whether they're talking about rural, urban, or national. And then let's look at progress over time. So these 2 panels are showing electrification rates in the year 2000 and in the year 2016. In the year 2000, we see a lot of blues for the national electrification rates in Africa. And then when we switch to 2016, we see that we have a lot more purples and a lot of yellows as well. So we have made progress over time, despite the fact that population increases literally every day. So let's keep fighting the good fight. Let's not give up hope. Let's keep working because we are making progress. So my company is called Energy Research Consulting. We're based in Washington, DC. In general, what we do is we provide energy and water solutions and strategies for small and medium-sized businesses in Africa. Along with that, we provide training for those solutions, and we're also involved in some education projects. We care very much about sustainability, so we ensure that our solutions are fit for purpose. We encourage entrepreneurship and therefore encourage development by providing energy and water expertise. Sustainable energy essentially means that we're addressing today's energy needs without compromising the future. And that means that sustainable energy is affordable, it's reliable, it's fit for purpose. So we are agnostic on the fuel source. We use whatever makes sense for the situation that we're dealing with. It's efficient, so it minimizes energy waste and also water waste. It's resilient, so it's resilient in order that there's continuity and longevity. And that means that we generally only use commercially proven technologies. And then finally, it minimizes environmental harm, which is the traditional or expected definition of sustainability. But sustainability also includes all the other things that I mentioned. So now I'm going to give you examples of unsustainable projects. The first, like I said, is new technology. So I don't want to turn my clients into guinea pigs by trying out solutions on them that have never been proven in the field. If the equipment breaks down and the manufacturer has gone out of business, or if the equipment breaks down and the manufacturer is not able to come to where they are to fix the equipment, then they're forced to shell out more money to buy, brand new equipment, and that's not sustainable. The second example is on high maintenance costs. So I visited a village in Burkina Faso and spoke with people who had, a single solar panel on the roof of their house, which pretty much just powered one light bulb. But maintaining the solar panels and the batteries and all the other equipment was actually costing them 3 times their monthly salary every 3 months. Obviously, they couldn't afford that. So then what they would do is they would, only have the equipment serviced once a year. This is unsustainable. It means that the equipment will reach its end of life faster because it's not being serviced regularly. So ensuring that maintenance costs are reasonable is important. And then finally, unsustainability means that we're not addressing the issues. I give an example here of a rural community in Alaska that's snowed in the winter, and they use 2 diesel generators. One of them is backup for the other. And they went through a winter where one of the diesel generators broke down, and then eventually the other one broke down as well. And so when they emerged from that winter, they wanted, backup power to back up both of those generators. And some well-meaning solar panels to provide power in the winter. And for people who don't understand why this is an issue, most of Alaska doesn't receive sunlight in the winter. Some parts of Alaska don't receive sunlight for months. And so solar panels are unsustainable in this situation. What about sustainability examples? Disclaimer, all the examples I'm about to give you, I actually worked on with either my company or with the government agencies I worked with. So I'm a little biased maybe. I worked on a mushroom farming initiative in northern Nigeria, a rural area that was far from the grid and far from piped water. They planned to use solar panels to generate electricity, and these solar panels would power lights, temperature control, because you need that to grow mushrooms, and also the water treatment and irrigation system. So understanding that we had limited electricity, I was very careful to use only the most efficient solutions so that we minimize the amount of energy that was used for the water treatment system. We worked on an education project in Senegal, where we created the Dakar American University of Science and Technology. It's a STEM-focused university, so only science and engineering. And if that's not sustainable enough, because we're creating engineers and scientists who will go off and do great things in the world, we also focused on making sure that the education we provide is practical. So we're not just teaching theory, but we're teaching the kids how to apply that theory in the real world, so that by the time they graduate, they're well able to design and build and engineer things. I also worked on creating a strategy to minimize water use in coal plants in Botswana. Botswana has 200 billion tons of coal, so it's actually sustainable for them to use what's in their backyard. But they have 75% desert. Generating power from coal uses a lot of water, so we came up with a strategy to help them improve the efficiency of their plants in order to reduce the amount of water used. We worked with the government in Kenya and the utility in Kenya. They were very concerned about the geothermal reservoirs because they could see that they were starting to become depleted. And they want these reservoirs to be generating electricity, not just 30 or 50 years from now, but 200 years from now. So we worked with them to generate strategies to ensure that that happens. And then finally, this is a fledgling project. It's brand new. We're still developing this. But we're working with a rural community in Ivory Coast or Côte d'Ivoire. And this is a community that's pulling their money together to buy a fleet of solar panels, which will generate power, and the power will be shared among the people who are part of that pool. This is much more sustainable because at the scales that we're looking at, we're realizing economies of scale, which make maintenance costs and even the capital costs per kilowatt hour much lower than if each individual was doing this themselves. So, I kind of want to point out the pictures that we're looking at. Abidjan, which is the capital of Ivory Coast or Côte d'Ivoire, and you can see all of that beautiful electricity. That's a beautiful city. And then you contrast that with the rural mini-grid example that I'm showing. So again, the rural areas, you see a very different scenario from the urban areas. So this was my last slide. I just want to thank you guys for tuning in. Like I said, we're always looking for partners. We're always looking for potential clients. So if you think that there's a possibility that we could work together, even if it's not going to happen right away, please do reach out. And get in touch so that we can start having those conversations. So thank you for your attention. That's all I had. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Well, Quinta, thank you very much for your interesting presentation. We have a couple of questions for you. And members of the audience can continue to submit them to me as we go along here. But for starters, could you tell us, in your experience, what are some of the systemic challenges in addressing rural electrification in Africa? You made a point about this early on in the presentation about the distinctions between rural and urban electrification. And so where is progress on rural electrification? Where has it been successful? Where has it maybe been less successful? And what are the lessons learned?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and it's a question that a lot of governments are trying to solve. The biggest issue is that in the rural areas, the population density is sparse. So you don't have as many people as you do in obviously the dense urban areas. The second problem is that in the rural areas, people just have less money, and so they're less able to pay for the power that would come to them. Unfortunately, a lot of times people, government agencies, some agencies that I work for, they don't want to spend the money to extend the grid to a rural area because they know that the payback will not be as great. So what we need is what I've been taught by my economist friends are called anchor customers. You need anchor customers in those areas. Those are customers that are guaranteed to use power and a lot of it. So then the electrical utility is more willing to bring power to that area, knowing that they have a dedicated customer. And then the rural people or the people in that rural area can benefit from having the grid being brought close to them. So an anchor customer could be, a big firm, a mining outfit, a factory, things like that. But actually in some countries, the anchor customer is also just a wealthy person who happens to have or wants to build a house in that area, and they want to guarantee that they have electricity. And so they'll pay the connection costs to have the grid extended to that area. And then everybody else benefits because now it's cheaper for them to connect. So that's part of why I do what I do. I encourage entrepreneurship, even in the rural areas, because I feel like if we can have more businesses developed in that area, then the utility is more willing, to spend the money to bring power to that area.
So in your presentation, one of the areas of energy that gets a lot of press, certainly in North America and in Europe, is wind. So I don't think you addressed this at all, and I'm just curious if you think there are any opportunities or any specific challenges for wind power in the countries in Africa where you're working.
Yeah, wind power can certainly work. I think South Africa leads the charge, at least when it comes to Africa. Maybe Morocco and Egypt are doing pretty well as well. I know Ethiopia has some wind, and I know Kenya has been looking into it seriously. I think the biggest challenge is that there's not enough, there haven't been enough technical studies done to figure out exactly where the best wind potential is in each country in Africa. So I think that's the first step, is knowing even what the potential is. But beyond that, there were difficulties. The fact that wind is intermittent and you really can't predict when the wind will pick up and when it will die down. So even with all the money that would be spent, because the capital cost is great, with all the money that would be spent, you still have to have backup power for that power, because you can't guarantee that the wind will blow when you need it. And the way the grid works, it needs to be perfectly balanced. So you have to be using the exact amount of water that energy that's being produced, and wind just causes a lot of uncertainty. So if you have a situation where the grid is balanced already and the wind picks up and now you're generating extra electricity, you need to figure out, how to offload that electricity quickly, or else it destabilizes the grid. So those are some of the issues, and all of that applies also to solar. Just the intermittency of it, the same challenges apply.
But is wind an energy resource that is sort of universally available around Africa, or is it?
Well, like I said, the technical studies need to be done. I can tell you, like I said, Kenya is looking into it, and I've seen some of those studies, and so it is very viable in Kenya. I think the issue with with at least that particular study is that it was in a rural area, and so they were thinking, well, if we generate this power here, then we have to pay a lot to evacuate it to another area where we have a denser population, because the people around here, there's just not enough of them to make it worthwhile. But I also know that I've been in parts of Cape Town in South Africa, and you stand in a particular place and the wind is practically almost lifting you off your feet. So it is viable, at least in certain parts of Africa. But we need to figure out where it's viable and how viable it is, and what is the capacity really.
Good. You on one of your slides, you made reference to the energy water nexus, which I think is kind of interesting. When people talk about this, they generally are referring, I think, to the amount of water required to produce a given source of energy supply. So do you see it the same way, or do you see additional aspects of this energy water nexus?
Yeah, but that's just half of it, right? Because the nexus is that both of them influence each other. Energy, has an impact on water treatment, and water has an impact on energy generation. So we have to look at both sides. So with water, water needs to be transported. If there's a central treatment facility, you have to expend energy in order to pump it to people's houses and so on. In order to treat water, you need energy, right? Because you're removing bacteria, you're filtering things, all of that uses energy. And then, transportation, treatment, and then waste disposal. So if I brush my teeth and that water goes out, disposing of wastewater uses energy as well. So yeah, it's this balance where the more water you use, the more energy you expend, and vice versa, right? The more energy you generate, the more water you use. And so balancing both so that you're optimizing, or at least minimizing waste and increasing efficiency is very important.
You had a slide on operating constraints for African firms, and it indicated, among other things, that access to finance is quite a binding constraint, although only slightly more binding perhaps than for other developing countries. In your experience, has limited access to finance affected any of your clients? And if so, do you have any suggestions for possible remedies?
Yeah, access to finance is actually a really big issue. I have some clients who I know would have done bigger things than they were doing, or would have moved faster if they had money available for them. I think it starts with education. A lot of people stumble into entrepreneurship and they don't necessarily know what their options are for funding, and or how to set up their books, or how to set up numbers so that they're actually appealing to even potential investors. So it begins with, educating the entrepreneurs. Yeah.
think we had a break there. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I've actually met people, investors in Africa. So they have investment firms, and they're actually looking for small and medium enterprises. And so they're asking me to send my clients their way. And, you know, some of them have niches that they focus on. So some people are purely agriculture and so on. So I think it's a question of these two sides being able to find each other. Mm-hmm. And hopefully people like myself can help, you know, connect them. So I certainly do that when I can and when it makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, there were a few other solutions. I'm not a finance person, but those are.
Well, we have a follow-on question to the water issue, and that is, what are some of the engineering solutions on the horizon to address water scarcity in Africa? And are there some countries in Africa that are doing a better job of this than others?
Well, you know, the simplest solutions I think are the best. I'm not going to name the country, but I know there's at least one country where, because of leaky pipes and things like that, about 50% of the treated water is actually wasted. Mm. That is a lot, because you think about all the energy and costs and everything else that goes into treating that water. So yeah, the simplest solutions are the best. We need to optimize, you know, we need to upgrade infrastructure. Frankly, a lot of times we don't need to reinvent the wheel. The solutions are already there, but we don't need to do anything new. We just need to make sure that the systems that are in place are more efficient.
Okay. I have another question from the audience. Your university that you addressed in Senegal focuses on STEM.
Yeah.
So that's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. But energy is part of a political system around the world. And I suspect that Africa is probably not exceptional in that respect. Right. Are the students that are being trained, being educated, being prepared for the context of delivering solutions, particularly referencing the context of the influence of the political side?
To be frank, I don't necessarily think we're doing enough of that. I have a research center at the university, and one of the projects that I developed was specifically that, you know, let's look at energy policy in Senegal, and let's just map the policy landscape, and then we wanted to focus on oil and gas. My point is, I don't think we're doing enough of that. And I thank whoever in the audience pointed that out. We're doing a little bit of that, but yeah, you guys are absolutely right. We need to spend more time on that, because the policies are what create the enabling environment that allows or prevents things from happening. Okay,
so one last question. You're based in the United States, in Washington, D.C., as I understand. How do you, and yet you do all these projects in Africa, how do you and your clients find each other? And how do you decide which of the possible project engagements you would want to pursue?
Yeah, well, it's the old-fashioned way that I meet people. It's through my network. I try to build an extensive network, and I try to meet I like interesting people, so I try to meet as many people as possible. But oftentimes when I talk about what I'm doing, people usually say, well, you know, I know someone that I think you should absolutely talk to, and you should meet the person. And that's kind of how it happens. It's really word of mouth. It's networks that I'm in, emails go out, and, well, this person is looking for an expert on this, and would you be willing to work with them? So it generally happens like that. I also attend conferences. I was just at the Global Entrepreneurship Summit in The Hague in April, which is put on by the State Department. And it was a room full of a facility full of 2,000 entrepreneurs from all over the world. It was heaven for me. But I met a lot of entrepreneurs in Africa who I'm now partnering with.
This is a great segue into, well, thanking you for your presentation, your time with us today. And we'll do what we can to make you visible on our website. So thank you very much, Quinta, for your presentation and your responses to the questions. We have recorded the session, and we shall post it on the Forum2100 website within the next 2 days. So for everyone in the audience, if you have follow-on questions for Quinta, you will find your contact information on the website, on the Forum2100 website. And please send others whom you think might have interest in this talk or any of the other talks we've had before to the website. As many of you already appreciate, coalitions will likely be required to address the world's energy challenges. So with this in mind, our next business and energy talk will be on October 24th. That's a Thursday, where Maribel Ayres will be addressing the opportunities and challenges of building coalitions. She is a principal at Lighthouse Consulting Group and was in a leadership position of the U.S. Climate Action Partnership, otherwise known as US CAP, and is going to share her experiences and some of the lessons learned in trying to make this industry nonprofit and governmental cooperation work. Please join us. That's October 24th, same time, 11:30 Eastern Standard Time, which will be 5:30 Continental European Time. And we look forward to seeing you. On behalf of Dave Nagel and me, we thank you for joining us today. Dr. Nwanosike-Warren, thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you back on the 24th of October. Bye for now.